To this webinar on the horns of a dilemma. I'm Suki Norris, and you're going to hear a lot of my voice for the next while. Before I get started, just to let you know, you can ask questions by putting questions in the control panel. There's a little place for questions. In addition, you can get a copy of today's presentation in the also in that control panel. And I might recommend it because, as usual, I add quite a long bibliography to the end of the presentation so that you can have an idea of what I've reviewed in putting this presentation together. We are recording this webinar, and it will be available within a couple of business days. You'll get notification that you can download it if you're interested, or if some of your friends want to hear it. With that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So what we're going to talk about today is artificial intelligence in behavioral health. I wanted to start with a quote that I picked up that I think is really interesting. I believe this artificial intelligence is going to be our partner. If we misuse it, it will be a risk. If we use it right, it can be our partner. Keep that in mind as we go through this webinar, that there is this balancing effect that always is going to apply to artificial intelligence. The agenda today is fairly packed. We're going to spend some time with a sort of a timeline of artificial intelligence. I'm going to provide you some definitions that you'll be able to go back to about artificial intelligence. And then what does AI do? And we're going to look at it generally, where you might see it in your life, how it might affect physical health, and how it affects behavioral health. And then we're going to look at the challenges, the employment concerns, bias that is inherent in AI, ethics that's related to AI, and then some of the fun risks I've run into as I've been looking at AI that just might, a little bit might keep me up at night, but not too much. And then what are the future possibilities and what is the dilemma? Why is there a balancing act between AI and, in this case, the DSM-5? This is just a bit about me, and you can certainly come back to it and read it at your leisure. So let's start with the history of AI. It starts with the Turing test, and Turing was one of the founders of modern computing. And he put out a test as it relates to artificial intelligence that says that a computer, well, you will pass the test if a computer program can impersonate a human in real-time written conversation with a human judge sufficiently enough so that the judge can't reliably distinguish between the program and a real person. In a more recent rendition of the Turing test, they've added the concept of voice recognition and sort of a more moral Turing test, looking at the voice and facial and other aspects of AI we'll be talking about, and how if a judge can tell the difference between the computer or a person. In 1956, at a conference in Dartmouth College, the first definition that I found of AI came out, and that was a computer program must impersonate a human real-time written conversation with it's that getting a computer to do things which, when done by people, are said to involve intelligence. In 1961, the first industrial robot was used at a GM plant in I think it was New Jersey. There are going to be a few movie references as we go through the timeline, because I think it brings some interesting concepts of how we perceived artificial intelligence might be. So the first is in 1968, a 2001 Space Odyssey. And this is the first time most movie goers saw a computer that could think and act on its own. And that was, the computer's name in that case was HAL. In the early 1970s, a program called Perry was created at Stanford University. And Perry simulated a person with paranoid schizophrenia, and like a program before it that I actually remember, known as ELIZA, this program could converse with others, and it in fact was the first program of its kind to pass the Turing test that I referenced earlier. When I was talking about this at home, I was reminded of War Games, which was a movie that came out in 1983 with a very young Matthew Broderick, where he hacked into a government computer and you could hear the computer say, shall we play a game? And when that game was played, they found out it was thermonuclear war that caused some interesting effects. In 1984, the Terminator movie came out, and that involved a cyborg who was disguised as a human. Again, the first times we saw these things is what I'm really trying to bring up. In 1997, an IBM computer beat a chess master. It took 3 days for that chess game to come to an end, but the IBM computer did prevail. Roomba, the vacuum cleaner robot, came out in 2002. And just remember a little, just keep in your mind the concept of a vacuum cleaner computer, because it's going to come up a little later in a different context. In 2011, and probably many of us remember this, Watson beat Ken Jennings on Jeopardy! Also that year, and you may not know, Siri came out. In 2013, the Durkheim Project, which was a DARPA, which is Defense Advanced Research Projects, sponsored program that established both validated risk metrics for suicide risk and a capability to scale to larger opt-in networks. The various data and revised indicators were then fed into an analytics environment, which enabled both accurate and timely interventions by clinicians via a secure communication network. And this was designed to find suicide risk amongst military personnel. In 2014, Alexa came out. In 2016, a computer won a game of Go against top players. And then finally in 2019, a computer beat top players in StarCraft. And the interesting thing about this is that StarCraft is a team-based game. And the computer, it was determined that the computer did not understand the concept of team, but each of the members of the, in quotation marks, team understood the game so completely, they beat the team, the top team of that they were competing against. So this deals with the history of AI generally. But I also wanted to cover a couple of things that deals with more mental health specific history. The first is Diagno, which was a tool for diagnosis assistance that was developed during the 1960s and 70s at Columbia University. It was a decision tree that walked the clinician through a differential diagnosis, and actually it obtained comparable performance as human clinicians, but it was never put into real world use. And then finally, Perry was a program that was developed at Stanford University that simulated I think we talked about this, but again, simulated that person with schizophrenia. Artificial intelligence is a series of subdomains, in essence, that make up all the different components that both individually and together constitute artificial intelligence. That includes the kinds of things you see there. And as you look at this, and again, you can look at it when we're done, think about the things that you do on a daily basis that are pieces of the subdisciplines. Because remember that the definition of artificial intelligence is for that computer to do what we as humans do on a daily basis in thinking and sort of coping with our environment. We bring in reasoning, decision making, real-time reasoning, planning, research. There's qualitative reasoning that goes on, and logic. So as you look at all of those, and as we continue our talk about artificial intelligence, keep in mind, these are the pieces that make up artificial intelligence. So I want to get into a few definitions. We talked about the definition of artificial intelligence. I'll give you one more just sort of as it came to be. It's the theory and development of computer systems able to perform tasks that normally require human intelligence, such as visual perception, speech recognition, decision-making, and translation between languages. Virtual reality, which has some very specific behavioral health uses, is defined as a computer-generated simulation, such as a set of images and sounds that represents a real place or situation that can be interacted with in a seemingly real or physical way by a person using special electronic equipment. It can transmit visual, auditory, and various sensations to users through a headset to make them feel as if they are in a virtual or imagined environment. Data mining is the process of discovery and analysis with regular or semi-automatic means, vast quantities of information. It is the basis by which we can do finding pattern determination in large amounts of data. It's something marketers do, read Amazon, to understand what their customers want. The artificial neural network is quite simply the concept of a computer system simulating the way that a human brain analyzes and processes information. They have a self-learning capability that allows them to produce better results as more data becomes available. Machine learning is how machines get all that information. It is data sets that are entered, that are determined by humans, that are entered into a computer and will help the computer improve on a task. Deep learning is just an extension of that, of using that information and continuing to imitate the workings of the human brain in processing all that data. Robotics is concerned with how do we train a robot to interact with the world around it in both generalizable and predictable ways. How do you facilitate manipulation of objects in interactive environments, and how to interact with people? Advances in robotics will rely on commensurate advances to improve the reliability and generality of computer vision and other forms of machine perception. The other thing to think about are robots. Is there a human action that is driving the robot, or they are autonomous entities? As they move through time, they become more autonomous. As they become more autonomous, there is a concern about risks that is raised as we look at artificial intelligence. Computer vision is a function of machine perception. It's a sub-area of AI, and it is driven by deep learning. For the first time, computers are able to perform vision tasks better than people. Natural language processing is really important. It is teaching a computer to understand our speech. It is critical for the work that people want to do with computers, for bringing computers further into an artificial intelligence mechanism. The Internet of Things is research that's devoted to the idea that a wide array of devices, including appliances, vehicles, buildings, etc., can be interconnected to collect and share sensory information to use for intelligent purposes. And finally, deepfakes, something you all probably have heard about. It's a term that generally describes videos doctored with cutting-edge artificial intelligence. So those are some basic definitions that will come up as I go on and talk about the various areas of artificial intelligence. So how would you recognize AI? Well, it's everywhere. It's in medical diagnosis, stock trading, robot controls, remote sensing, scientific discovery, and toys. But the thing about AI right now is you don't know it's AI, because a lot of cutting edge AI has just filtered into our everyday lives, into general applications, without anyone calling it AI. It's just the current functionality of these things that we interact with. You'll see them specifically in finance, heavy industries, online and telephone customer service, transportation, think vehicles that drive themselves, telecommunications, music, toys and games, aviation, farming, which we'll talk about a little bit, and McDonald's marketing, which we'll also talk about some. So precision agriculture, which is farming, is an ideal it is a computer that will help a farmer provide just enough water, fertilizer, and pesticide so that a crop will make its maximum yields in an era of climate change and global population, where food is so much more important. The data that is captured through low-flying planes and in other mechanisms is processed through algorithms, and it will calculate the water stress down to the individual crop level. It interprets the resulting patterns to identify what is causing water shortages. Other uses of AI in farming include self-driving tractors. So in the farming areas, especially in California, a lot of AI is coming to bear on how food is processed and and farms are managed. McDonald's is programming digital boards to market food more strategically. It takes into account such factors as the time of day, the weather, the popularity of certain menu items, and the length of the wait. As example, on a hot afternoon, the board might promote soda rather than coffee. At the conclusion of every transaction, the screens will display a list of recommendations to get people to want more. At some drive-through restaurants, McDonald's has tested a license plate recognition so that it will allow them to tailor lists based on what you got the last time you drove through. So in some places, McDonald's is really becoming the Amazon of fast food, in my way of thinking. So that's how it is both positively and I think a tad bit negatively impacting our general life. What about physical health? Well, some people have a challenge getting to a doctor, and so they created a medical chatbot that uses artificial intelligence to help diagnose a disease and provide certain details before you see your doctor, and that information gets passed on to your doctor. Or a chatbot may act as a reference book, and the patient will know more about their disease to sort of improve their health. And so those are ways that people can do it, in addition to the old-fashioned way of going out to WebMD and searching what you think is your problem. Also, a text-to-text diagnosis bot engages patients in conversations about their medical issues and provides personalized diagnosis based on their symptoms. To support machine learning, workers review things like medical tests and x-rays or colonoscopies. And their job is to identify, in the essence of, around a colonoscopy as an example, polyps. They circle them on the picture that they're given, and that information is fed directly into a computer, who then processes it, understanding when a colonoscopy shows something that needs to be addressed or doesn't. They're doing the same thing with x-rays, even with different coughs. So people listen to coughs all day to determine which cough is a cough that represents a serious illness and which cough is just maybe an allergy. Given all this information, computers then are able to identify patterns and interpret images. And what is found is that they are able to do this with this much data to the same skill level as a comparable human radiologist, and with a higher degree of accuracy for the most part. Google has created systems that help pathologists read microscope slides to diagnose cancer, and to help ophthalmologists detect eye disease in people with diabetes. Cardiology and radiology are two fields where the amount of data can be overwhelming to the provider and time intensive. Using the computers will cut through that time and get a faster diagnosis out to the providers. IBM is also in this area, and they're committed to a long-term investigative project to build the next generation cognitive assistant with analytical reasoning capabilities and an extensive range of clinical knowledge. The idea is it is being designed to help in clinical decision making in the same areas, and to learn from the information it gets, relying less on machine learning and more on computer learning. We're also seeing this in the operating room. In 2000, there was a system marketed to affect minimally invasive heart bypass surgery. And it actually gained a lot of market traction for the treatment of prostate cancer as well. Now it provides 3D visualization as opposed to 2D laparoscopy and wristed instruments in an ergonomic platform. It's considered the standard of care in multiple laparoscopic procedures and used in nearly 750,000 procedures a year, providing not only a physical platform, but a data platform for studying the process of surgery. So you're seeing a pervasive use of technology right now to further the abilities of the clinicians, not to take over the abilities of the clinicians. So what about AI in behavioral health? Well, the first thing that they found is that they fed EEG data into a computer, and there was an 83% accuracy rate for the computer in classifying patients with depression. Twitter research has been done to find depression and risk of self-injury. And out of 12 billion tweets that were from April 11th to May 4th of 2014, 1.5 million showed signs of depression. In addition, approximately 700 tweets per day showed an indication of thoughts about self-harm or suicide, giving people the opportunity to think about how, using artificial intelligence, we may work through tweets to identify people who need help, who may or may not already be getting help. Researchers are also investigating a multimodal indicator for depression detection. And what we mean by multimodal is it's got visual, it's just multiple different inputs like voice and visual that will help them, that when reviewed can distinguish interviewees with depression from those without depression with an accuracy of 75%. I gave you a virtual, I talked about virtual reality earlier. Virtual reality has been used for the last several years, and it's provided really remarkable outcomes with using various types of stimulation. It's helped relieve pain, stress, anxiety in an imagined space. It also provides educational and psychological training without causing any harm to a patient. Areas where we've seen where really there's been very effective use is in PTSD, especially as it relates to soldiers returning from battle. Addressing phobia, anxiety, depression, cognition, social skills, memory functions, job interview skills, and vocational training. A continuum of things that help people either return to or identify the need to get help, return to their life or the need to get help. Paro, which I kind of like this because I saw a picture of it. It's a robotic device that looks like a seal. It makes noises like a seal and has fur and responds to being pet, being hugged. Well, they're using it as a substitute for animal therapy in working with people with schizophrenia. And what they're finding is that it is reducing stress and anxiety. It promotes a social interaction and improves mood and speech fluency. So just something interesting. Neural networks really speak to the ability of a computer to learn and the ability to make connections between facts and draw conclusions, which is central to our learning. We as humans rely on common sense to make connections, but common sense to us is almost impossible to implement in a computer. AI technologies are also being used for detecting early onset of neurodegenerative disease. And this early detection is relevant only if it's accompanied by preventative steps or interventions. What was done is they did a vector analysis, but more simply put, the researchers looked at words that would be used to describe folks with neurodegenerative disease. And as an example, the words they wanted to see the relationship, what words related to the target word. In this case, the target word was paranoid. So they first analyzed a large and representative of the English language, a lot of different documents and posts, social media, anything you can think of where human language is presented. And they looked for what words were in the neighborhood of paranoid. And they found two, suspicious and angry. They now understand that suspicious and angry are two dimensions in the semantic space, in the word space of paranoid. Also, they found narcissistic and histrionic. These are really important advances because they improve psychological practice and research, and this technology is designed for the clinical psychologists and all to be able to more specifically address, to learn how to more specifically address the kinds of challenges that are presented to them. Smartphone technology is allowing or facilitating that multimodal concept I referred to earlier, because the smartphone triggers are measuring your behavior and can generate profiles to make objective predictions related to your health style. The three modalities are behavior, motion, and location. When they bring those together, they get an idea that can actually support the identification of 10 different health metrics. And the error rate does not exceed any clinical benchmarks. Finally, a couple last things. In the big data area, digital phenotyping, or sort of mapping for mental health, is a field that enables intelligent systems to sense and mine mental health states, supporting smart decisions, maximizing treatment outcomes, and facilitating prevention and surveillance based on these digital footprints. The image that you can't read but is on this screen at the top looks at what that phenotyping is. It's going to look to behavioral factors, your behavioral factors, social media, social factors. All of that comes together to define that digital phenotyping, which is a way for us to extend, for computers to extend their understanding of who people are and what they do. TMAP, I've known about this for a while, so I imagine many of you do, is computer-assisted depression medication treatment. It is a computer program that's designed to help providers when they are dealing with psychotropic medications to deal with depressions. It has a series of algorithms that you feed into, and what comes out are suggestions for medications. MOST was one of the most more successful and documented online social therapies. It's a moderated online social therapy that essentially tracks all the things that are said. It then weights them both positively and negatively, and when all of that is done, it will make recommendations for readings, for activities to help as part of the social therapy. And it is a completely moderated and managed by a number of clinicians and others who watch for the social, who look for various comments, who manage the rooms that people go into. So it's a completely managed social therapy with a response factor. So as you post, everything you post is graded. It is given a score. Those scores are calculated and suggestions are made. Woebot may be the modern equivalent of that, which isn't that old. Woebot really is a application you put on your phone, and you check in with Woebot, and it will ask you how you are today, and if you talk about certain things, it will give you suggestions, it will make recommendations. It is a completely it is cognitive behavioral therapy that is really done through artificial intelligence, with understanding that the content of the artificial intelligence, the content of the information was created by professionals, by clinicians, by psychiatrists, by social workers, by others, who all put that content together to ensure that the content being fed out to people was mediated or moderated or content. So those are an idea, long-winded to be sure, of how AI is used in behavioral health. What are the challenges to AI? Well, the first and most basic challenge is basic emotions. There's 7 basic human emotions: happiness, surprise, anger, sadness, fear, disgust, and neutral. Those all have to be understood by a computer. That's going to take time and work because remember, computers are objective. Underlying all of computers are just ones and zeros telling the computer what to do. They don't have common sense. They are not subjective beings. And some of those emotions are kind of subjective. You see them in another person. You know because you've talked to them that this is how they feel. Some of the latest technologies, and we sort of talked about these, are depression indicators that are based on automated depression level assessments. They're not really fully functional yet because of the existing disconnect that I talked about before between language technology subfields. We just don't understand, we cannot get computers to understand language at the same level that each of you on this call do. It is not it's just not yet been overcome and successfully done. Another area of real trouble is facial recognition. We're going to talk about it in a little bit, but it has really a lot of challenges. The technology just doesn't meet the needs yet. Speech processing, again, is the same kind of thing. It is not something that can be universally understood. While computers can understand the explicit words, they don't know the contextual way they've been presented, the voice that was used. I think that this can all be best explained in this next. So when a therapist looks to understand what a patient does, they're going to look at kinesics, MRI scans, laboratory examinations, assessments, and all of that's going to go into it. When AI does it, they have a black box, they look at the black box and they give a diagnosis. Until that black box replicates the process that you go through now to make a diagnosis, there's going to be a disconnect in the diagnosis process. Another area of concern with AI is employment. When one of the researchers about the use of AI for in radiology said, is this going to put radiologists out of business? The answer was absolutely not. Computers are not yet able to read the complex types of problems. Fast food workers. When McDonald was asked what would happen to fast food workers given what was going on with their voice-activated ordering, they refused to answer, which tells me that probably they're looking to ways to make sure to cut down their labor costs. Marginalized workers in general, as technology improves, are affected by it. The real question is it a threat or a boon to living standards? And that really goes to this double-edged sword. The more the more technology advances, the less expensive products are. The more technology advances, the more challenging employment will be, because that means that the technology is doing many things that you would anticipate you would be doing. And it's labor versus intellectual capital. As you get more AI, what's needed is intellectual capital to further the science. But the labor that people do with their hands becomes less needed because think about the farming example. AI can take over some of the farming jobs that were done by farmers and by their staff previously. I found this interesting, as many of you know or don't, may not have heard. I was a lawyer in my past life. AI has now affected the law in that although much of it isn't automated, the first-year lawyer is now being sort of supplanted by AI, who can, because they can extract and topic model. So that's part of what first-year lawyers do. In the not too distant future, probably a diverse array of job holders, just as I was saying, may be affected by AI. I want to say, though, before I move on, it's doubtful psychologists and mental health professionals are going to be replaced by artificial intelligent agents. The use of AI technologies may have a cost effect on services in the years ahead, but to completely replace the individual is very far, far in the future, if really possible at all. One of the problems of AI is bias. The bias is pervasive. It is in facial recognition software that has shown an inability to recognize anybody of color, Asians, Blacks, Hispanics. It has been used and proven mostly with the white population. The statistical bias is very, very similar. When research is done, most often it is done with a group of people that doesn't represent who we are. And so what happens is that the conclusions that are drawn are applied broadly, even if the statistical work wasn't broadly applied, making diagnoses, so you are going to now diagnose everybody based on a primarily Caucasian group that was studied. Documentation, and this really affects areas of like cardiovascular disease, and other similar areas. Even in psychiatric notes, and when they were reviewed, AI demonstrated a greater documentation of anxiety and chronic pain topics for whites and psychosis topics for Blacks, Hispanics, and Asian patients. This alerted clinicians to the disparities in documentation in real time because it didn't make sense by practice. It was a problem in the quality of the research and the way the research went into doing it. As AI machine learning improves, if this is the data that we feed into AI systems, we are hurting 40% of our population. And that is not acceptable. It's not acceptable on a personal level or a science level or a research level. And it ought not to be acceptable to anybody. And we need to go back to square one and start that research again. Because if we don't, we are committing AI malpractice. Even if you as a provider get past it, those algorithms that you use are not past it. And that is a problem. The next area is ethics. The first question I would ask is it really okay to create replicas of humans? I don't know. But that is what AI is attempting to do. What about the bond between the expert and the patient if the expert is a computer? I don't want my computer being the expert. I trust a person to be that expert. I know when I go out to WebMD, I'm only as good as the questions I create to ask my doctor, but I can't diagnose myself. While it's an expert of data, it's not an expert of maybe diagnosis. And that speaks to the ethics of computer-based diagnosis. I don't know that there are any right now. And in the absence of the ethics of, it isn't as if the APA, when doing the DSM-5, had no ethics requirements. They weren't allowed to operate in out in the prairies as if nobody else was bothered by it. There are ethical requirements that apply to each of us in our daily work, in our daily actions, whether we work with clients or with other professionals. Whoever we work with, there are ethical considerations, and until computers can express those ethical considerations, I think it's a challenge. There are no established professional ethics applied to AI, and what this means is that you all who are providers have ethical requirements that you meet, your board of ethics, to keep your license. Computers have no such requirements. They can, and if so, what happens if they say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing? The final area, and this one really surprised me, I guess, was unauthorized use of photos. So a lab in Finland many years, not that many years ago, built a system that can analyze thousands of snapshots. And they got thousands of shots. They got their hands on, and several people have gotten their hands on 700,000 different pictures of individuals that were all obtained from a website where people uploaded their pictures, didn't know that they had no expectation of privacy. These are being downloaded by a lot of different companies, including to identify protesters, to surveil terrorists, to spot problem gamblers, and to spy on the public at large. But more importantly than that, think of yourself at 17, all of a sudden seeing a picture of yourself at 4 on websites in every place you can imagine. How would you feel? You'd feel violated. That happened in Illinois, and Illinois, in response, put out a very, very stringent bioethics law. There are 8 other states that have done it. So now let me just do the math here for a minute. So just under 20, maybe about 20%, not quite, of all states have a law that prohibits the use of photos that were taken without, that were downloaded from a site that sold them. The other states, in case you're curious, if you live in Illinois, you're very safe. And there are a couple of large cases that are going on right now that may affect you. But if you live in New York, Arkansas, Louisiana, Texas, Arizona, Oregon, Washington, or California, you have some safety. If you live in any of the other states, you probably want to lobby your legislatures to put something in place quickly. Before I kind of talk about what the challenges are, I wanted to just talk a little bit about risks. These are the risks the reason why you worry about phishing emails and malicious threats and denial of service. When it gets into AI, it becomes a much bigger possibility. There's digital threats and physical threats. We know there's political security related. AI gives you the opportunity to expand threats, to create new threats, and to alter the typical character of threats. And to explain this, I just want to give you one little scenario that I read in a malicious AI report. So think about, you have a government building, and a sweep box, similar to Roombas, are used to clean it. A And think now they're in the underground, and another sweet bot just kind of goes in with the first group, and they're all together in a room where they sit until they get used next. Well, on the day of the attack, they let the sweet bots out, but one of them doesn't follow the other ones. They look to be involved in standard cleaning, but when they see the finance minister, they send a notice to somebody who pushes a button, and that sweet bot explodes, killing the finance minister. It hasn't happened. They haven't done a movie on it. But when you talk about threats, that's what you're talking about. The ability to take over the artificial intelligence that you rely on and have it do a thing that you weren't expecting. The future is interesting. What about a computer that has all the different features that you as a therapist do? There are improvements to the clinical setting. There'll be healthcare robotics, mobile health, elder care. As this crop of younger folks become older folks, they will have been used to computers. The more that population is used to computers, the more that there will be computers and artificial intelligence to help them. Quality of life includes the improvement of transportation and other areas. Treatment, we've talked about it. We've talked about health and weight, but I want to just spend 1 minute on persuasive mirrors, because I can't imagine personally having one of these in my house, but perhaps you can. A persuasive mirror is a mirror that has artificial intelligence built into it, as well as a couple of cameras attached to it. And it will identify what your goals are. Let's say you're trying to lose weight. It will track what you've been eating. And if you've overeated, it will display you perhaps as heavier. But if you've done real well, it will give you reinforcement by showing you with having lost weight. If you are trying to quit smoking and it detects you smoke, it will show your face more ragged. But if you don't smoke, you'll look young and strong. In other words, it is a mirror that can either help what you want help or speak to what might be my greatest fear. Somebody's watching me, knows what it is, and then tells me that they've been watching. But keep an eye out for your persuasive mirror. So that leads us to, why is this the dilemma? Let's start with the positive. Virtual reality helps people, not only provides care, but it avoids stigma and avoids people missing out on care. It gives people the ability to get comfortable with what their diagnosis is, as an example, and when they're ready, they can reach out to a clinician, which the virtual reality machine will help them do. On the other hand, think of a super clinician, one that can sense heat, has facial recognition, can replicate the person of a clinician. The question there is, are they providing care or they are assisting the clinician? What about therapy? Do you have an objective computer or a subjective therapist? What this all speaks to is, might AI devalue the client's perception of what that therapeutic relationship is? So what can you do? There are professional organizations that you want to participate in, because what they will do is develop oversight of your practice, and ensure that you're represented, that they gain representation in determining ethical issues and others. But as we go into this, I want to add one thing. Think back to Ken Jennings. When Watson beat him, it was the computer that beat him. But what couldn't that computer do? That computer couldn't shake his hand, pat him on the back and say, good job. That computer couldn't do anything to make him feel better about having lost to the computer. Is that the real challenge with AI? You have to understand how AI is in your world and what its influence will grow over time. And again, to meet this, what you need to do is participate in the design of technology. Have your voice heard. If AI is going to move into clinical areas, make sure there's a clinician at the table. Because right now, for the most part, this is being done by developers who don't have your clinical license, your clinical experience. What about curating the information? You know best what your population needs. Be a part, get yourself involved in curating the information, being a part of those decisions. Again, get ethical issues discussed and addressed in the documents that manage your organizations. And then you have to work with your clients to help them understand how to use technology, how to manage the risk and the reward. But here's what I really think and what I would say to your clients. To be a clinician is to provide care and to provide warning when appropriate from the perspective of a client. And I don't think that's ever really going to be a computer. Remember the quote I started with. Artificial intelligence is going to be your partner. If it's misused, it will be a risk. But if we use it right, it will be your partner and a partner that you can depend on. Thank you. And we have a couple minutes left, and I will come back and I will also see if there are any questions. And we don't have any questions, and it is close to the time that you probably all want to get back to your own work. So I will thank you for being here. I'll remind you that that you can get this webinar has been recorded, and a link will be emailed to you within 2 business days. And on the slide deck are 2 additional things. You have my email address. Please feel free to email any questions that you didn't ask but might have. And as always, I've added a bibliography, and that's the documents that I've reviewed in putting together this presentation. If any of those articles or any areas interest you, let me know, and I'll see that I have all that information. I'll see that I get it to you so that you can read it on your own and come up with your own conclusions. Again, thank you so much for joining us, and I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you. Bye, and have a good day.